Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber make a pretty hilarious point, and it's something that just needs to be addressed. I'm going to flip it in here. The person basically tries to say that, look, your body and your muscles don't know how much weight you're lifting, they don't know weight, they don't know numbers, you just got to make things feel hard, this progressive overload doesn't matter, and other guys are trying to say training to failure is all that matters in here. It's again a video I made earlier today about training to failure. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, because again, this hat makes me look like a goddamn sexual Tyrannosaurus. And bonus points to everyone who knows the reference there, without reading everybody else's comments on it. All right, cliff notes. Anyone who thinks that your muscle tissue, fascia around them, and your connective tissue and your bones and stuff don't know weight has clearly never ripped anything. And if they think the actual tension on the bar doesn't affect things like micro tearing, that it's just about how it feels, then I'm sorry. I don't know what to say other than that's just sheer ignorance. The body absolutely does, and let's go into that a little bit more. All right, people want to argue it only matters about feel and a pump and whatever else and how difficult an exercise seems. Now, I'm not saying you can't make an exercise more difficult by using strict form. All right, that's perfectly acceptable, because you start taking other muscles out of a movement and you're trying to focus on just one muscle, something I talk about a little bit even for powerlifting. I'm generally of the opinion you need to be using multiple muscles on every exercise, but I understand, even I as a strength athlete background, understand the need for isolating a muscle when you really need to make that muscle bigger and stronger. Again, such as a weak link in an exercise, like a tricep or something. Totally get it. But the fact of the matter is, all you're doing, anything you do that makes an exercise seem more difficult is probably because you're either moving the weight through a longer range of motion, which I discussed quite a bit of, but moving a weight through a longer range of motion is physically doing more work. You are actually, in a way, doing just as hard of work as if you add weight, because moving a given weight twice the distance takes twice the energy and work that moving it half the distance does. That's just common sense and basic physics. I mean, still an energy to be factored in there, so you have to factor that stuff in. But as far as thinking that doing things to make it seem harder is going to remove the need for progressive overload, sorry, that's just simply not true. And people who say, well, your body doesn't know a given weight, yeah, it does. Every tendon in your body, every bone in your body has a shearing point of how much weight it can handle before it's damaged. Actual tension, direct tension, absolutely affects micro tearing in the fascia around your muscle fibers. It absolutely affects growth stimulation. It absolutely affects the peripheral nervous system and the way it recruits muscle fibers. Weight absolutely matters. There is force that has to be generated. And people can talk all they want about changing leverages. Yeah, because sure, if you change the lever arm or something with the way you do an exercise, it might require more or less force to move the same weight, but the weight still matters. You're just changing the leverage and the percentage of the leverage based upon kind of the lever arm as far as torques and things go. But it doesn't remove the fact that it's a given amount of weight that takes a given amount of force to move, even when you make that adjustment. You can't change those things. And you know what? Every successful coach out there who writes programs for the top athletes in the world, whether they're an NFL player or a soccer player or a boxer or anything else, all the best coaches in the world that write programs for gold medal winning athletes can absolutely program based upon percentages. And percentages of your 1 rep max, percentages of your 10 rep max, they can do it off percentages, because weight absolutely matters in your workloads. Tonnage moved absolutely matters in your workloads. And anyone who says otherwise is so profoundly fucking ignorant about exercise science and what the top coaches out there do, that you need to run screaming when they say silly shit like that. It's insane. It is literally insane. Go ask any top coach in the world who coaches anyone who's ever won a Super Bowl or a gold medal, who has to program them on a strength component. And remember, strength and size are directly correlated. You cannot separate them in the human body. The only time you can sometimes is when drugs come into the mix, because drugs can shift the ratios. You can grow muscle without it getting quite as strong with steroids. That is possible with enough drugs. But it still gets stronger even as it grows, even if you don't lift weights. And that's kind of the problem we run into. The point that needs to be addressed here. This stuff comes from the professional bodybuilding world, magazine writers, all this stuff. These are the people who say that. And as I've always pointed out, when drug doses get high enough, even at moderate amounts, you gain muscle faster without lifting weights than when you lift weights. That's a proven scientific fact. That's been proven with study after study after study on healthy young men. Anytime someone starts approaching 500 plus milligrams of prescription grade testosterone, you can have them sit on their ass and not touch a weight. Not touch a weight, and they gain muscle faster than people who are training under good coaches in the gym. When we measured on DEXA scans, they outgained them while sitting on the couch doing no exercise. More muscle than lifting weights. Now, pro bodybuilders are generally taking 4, 5, 6, 7 times as much drugs as that, and whole cocktails of drugs. More drugs, dramatically more drugs than the guys who sit on their ass and gain muscle faster than people who lift weights. Yet people want to take advice from them and their coaches who coach them on how to gain muscle and come up with silly shit like, it's just how hard you make the exercise seem. This is your perceived exertion because you can shift things to make it more difficult and get big with a little light ass weight. Well, no, that's because you're on 2 grams of steroids with growth hormone and IGF-1. That's how you're getting big as fuck while making 20 pounds feel like 100. That's how you're doing it. It has nothing to do with the fact that you're training better. It has to do with the fact that you're a genetically gifted bodybuilder pumping fuckloads of drugs into your body. All right, and this idea that's, oh yeah, it's because he just has a better mind-muscle connection. He can make 20 pounds feel heavier. Your body doesn't know it. Yeah, because he's on fuckloads of drugs. He doesn't have to lift weights to grow. He doesn't have to lift weights at all, so he can get away with using a 20-pound dumbbell and get big. But for everybody else, people who aren't on drugs or people who want to moderate the amount of drugs they use because they don't want a lot of side effects, they won't want health problems. For all of us in the other categories, we don't have that luxury. We can't use a 20-pound dumbbell and get big. See, we have to actually stimulate muscle growth, and muscle growth requires workload. It requires progressive overload. Now, that also brings me to another point that came up in there, a little side tangent. People were like, well, you know, your body only knows the muscle failure, and if you train to failure, you're hitting all the upper threshold fibers. No, you're not absolutely guaranteeing that, and here's why. If you're training to failure all the time, your peripheral nervous system gets fatigued, and your peripheral nervous system won't always recruit the upper threshold fibers you want it to recruit. So here's the problem you run into. If you're training too frequently while training to failure, and all of a sudden you're not as strong as you used to be, again, the example I gave of you'd been doing 200 pounds for sets of 8, and then you hit failure suddenly after a couple weeks with a set of 7 with 200 pounds instead, guess what? You're not growing from it. And do you know why? Because you fatigued your peripheral nervous system to the point where it's not able to recruit the upper threshold fibers well enough to get that 8th rep or that 9th rep. So you're reaching muscle failure, but you're still not getting all the available muscle fibers because you're too fatigued from the training to failure constantly. You're not giving yourself enough recovery time. Well, the problem with that is that you either then have to give yourself more recovery time by training less often, so then you lose training stimulation and you grow slower, or you have to just accept that you're going to have a lot of workouts to where you're going to lift less weight for less reps because you're not giving yourself proper recovery time because you're training to failure all the time. Definitely affects fatigue, both metabolically and peripheral nervous system. It affects all of those things. And so by it doing that, it's going to affect your training progress and it's going to affect your gains. And if that happens, even though you're training to failure, you're not getting all of the muscle fibers that you want. You're not stimulating anywhere near maximal development. And sometimes you're going to have weeks because you haven't recovered enough to where nothing progresses, where you're not making any gains at all. You only make progress with progressive overload, not through muscle failure. Muscle failure is just a tool in the equation. It's a very useful tool if used intelligently. It's an extremely useful tool if used intelligently. But if you're doing it all the time, to the point to where you're suddenly losing reps with the same weight, you're not making gains anymore. So going back to the other point, yeah, your body does know how much weight and how many reps you're doing. Just because you want to argue that they don't know math doesn't mean that they don't know tension and they don't know workload. And it doesn't mean that those things don't still affect gains. And like I said before, every single coach out there who works with the best athletes can run year-long programs off percentages and ensure their progress. Percentages of various maxes. And do you know why? Because these things do matter. Progressive overload is the king, not how much you perceive that it is. Rate of perceived exertion is a valuable tool, but it's because you're going to have days to where you train lighter and heavier as back off so that you can peak and do an undulating level of intensity. That's why RPE scales work, because they allow you to back off in order to facilitate better recovery. They give you almost like mini deloads in the sense of you can have little short peaks of slight overreaching and underreaching and kind of work off the dual factor recovery model. It doesn't mean that your rate of perceived exertions determines whether you're growing or not, and just because you perceive it as heavier than it should be doesn't mean that you're getting the full growth stimulation from it. It has to do with staggering recovery curves with mild overreaching. So that's why rate of perceived exertion model things work. You're just running a different model than percentages, but still most top coaches out there still use percentages. RPE scale is just a different style of training for when you're wanting to do, again, like a seesaw effect in terms of intensity, overload, recovery, things like that. That's what's going on there. It's not that an RPE 9 or RPE 10 means that you're automatically getting maximum growth out of it, because no, if your workload goes down, you're not. So yeah, this idea that these people come up with this comes directly out of the bodybuilding world. And it's like every other coach out there. So it's like Bill Starr, one of the most famous coaches, strength coaches out there, used to always joke and say that he wouldn't trust the average professional bodybuilder to coach a high school football team in the weight room. And that's because the average professional bodybuilder knows fuck all about training. And so you're going to go to them for advice, and they're going to tell you, oh, it's just about the feel. It's about how heavy you can make the weight feel. And then everyone wants to take that advice, and then they wonder why their gains are so slow. They wonder why they don't progress. It's because you're taking advice from people who are idiots about training, who come up with their own pseudoscientific or, what's the term I'm looking for, their own metaphysical ideas regarding training that have nothing to do with the way the body works. And they get away with it because they use tons of drugs and they're genetically gifted. That's their secret. They don't have to actually know how to train because of that. And so people get advice from them, these ideas, and it's just not true. And I'm not saying you can't make gains doing that, but you're not going to make anywhere near the gains that you could be making with that sort of mentality. It really is about progressive overload. And I don't mean lifting weights purely for the numbers, because if you're just cheating the weight up and changing your form all the time to lift a heavier weight and cheating and flopping around so that you can add weight to the bar, that obviously isn't the same thing. I'm talking about with smooth, clean form. You need to be able to progress that way. On all of your exercises, you need to be able to add weight and add reps over time, and that is the only way to stimulate growth, any significant amount. Everything else, if you're just doing it off feel and other stuff, you're just getting lucky when you make gains. It's a hit or miss. It's like flipping a coin as to whether you're going to make gains or not. You need to have your progress planned and use a proper systematic approach. And they don't have to be complex systematic approaches. They just need to be well thought out based upon basic rules of physiology. Again, there's plenty of free programs out there. I put out a lot of them. Plenty of other people put out free programs that are time proven and they work. It's just not that hard to get a hold of free programs. They're available everywhere. They're free. The ones that tens of thousands of people have used, including some of mine. So there's no need for people to go with any of this silly esoteric nonsense and talk about feel and hippie stuff. We have hard science on this. Exercise science is an actual form of science. And it's studied very heavily, and we have a pretty good idea of how to make muscles grow and get bigger and stronger at this point. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.